In laboratory Reddit, today's story is...
My husband thought I was his second choice and abandoned me in an airport, but 2 months later his first choice revealed a truth that changed everything. The trip for our first anniversary had been my dream come true. A resort by the sea, candlelit dinners, and quality time as a couple. I thought it was the perfect way to celebrate a year as husband and wife. I had planned several special touches. I even included his favorite wine for our toast, all to create an unforgettable experience. He seemed happy, or at least I thought he was. Now, looking back, I can see the signs that I previously overlooked, however subtle they were. He wasn't acting like himself during the trip. He was constantly checking his phone. He avoided holding my hand when we were walking, and he spent too much time staring out to sea instead of talking to me. He always told me that I analyzed things too much, so I convinced myself that I was imagining this tension between us. The last day was much quieter than I expected. I had planned a final romantic dinner, but he suggested we stay at the hotel and order room service. He barely touched his food and kept looking at me as if he wanted to express something but couldn't find the right words. I naively thought that maybe he was preparing a surprise, perhaps a special gift or a sincere gesture to conclude our trip in a memorable way. When we arrived at the airport, she suddenly excused herself, saying she was going to buy a coffee. I sat in the departure lounge, distracted by my phone, already thinking about our return to the daily routine. My phone vibrated with a message from her. I almost smiled, imagining that he was being affectionate by sending me a message when he was only a few steps away. But it wasn't affectionate at all, and the idea of returning to our routine turned out to be much more pleasant than what his message said. He wrote that he could no longer pretend to be happy when he wasn't, that he regretted marrying me because I wasn't his first choice, but that he had accepted to settle for his second choice. He told me he was sorry, but that it wasn't fair to either of us to continue living a lie. He wouldn't be coming back with me. He asked me to go home alone, and that we would talk later when he was ready. I looked around hoping it was a bad joke, that he would appear laughing from some corner. But he wasn't there. He had left. I reread the message several times, hoping I had misinterpreted it, but there was no mistake. I tried calling him many times, but they all went straight to voicemail. He had turned his phone off, or he was out of range. He had abandoned me in an airport without even having the decency to explain things to me face to face. And the worst thing was that he did it after an anniversary trip. He could have told me all this at home. I struggled to hold back my tears in public. There were too many people around and I was embarrassed, and besides I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry for him, for the man I still considered my husband. Soon the passengers began to board, so I collected my belongings and found my seat. Although I must admit, not wanting to present myself as an unbreakable woman, when the plane took off a few tears rolled down my cheeks. But I was looking out the window and I don't think anyone saw me. I'm not proud of it, but when you take a trip to celebrate love and you return completely alone, you feel an overwhelming sense of helplessness. Halfway through the flight, I did something I hadn't planned to do. I wrote to him. After he didn't answer my calls, I thought I didn't need to talk to him, but I needed answers. If I had known, I wouldn't have bought tickets on a plane with internet service. I simply wrote, "Why? Why are you doing this?" His reply came shortly after. He said he was tired of pretending to be someone he wasn't, that he had tried to make our marriage work, but he couldn't force non-existent feelings. He confessed that he married me because he considered me secure, reliable, and easy to please. But I wasn't the woman he really wanted. He told me that he thought that in time he would come to love me, but he was wrong. I felt completely humiliated and discarded, which is exactly how you feel when you discover that you are someone's second choice. I didn't marry him because he was a safe option. I married him because I loved him. I think that should be the only reason to get married. Safe and reliable, that's all I meant to him. I replied furiously, asking who that first option was, because I suspected he might have cheated on me. He didn't reply. By the time we landed, I felt completely numb. I didn't even try to call him again. I knew it was pointless. He had already made his decision, so there was no point or energy in trying to convince him. I arrived home, to our home, which now felt horrible. It only made me think about how much he had been pretending all this time, while I believed we loved each other. He had left his shoes by the door before we went on our trip, so I took my anger out on them by kicking them hard. Then I collapsed on the sofa, staring blankly, allowing everything that had happened to sink in. I had neither the strength nor the motivation to do anything else. I don't remember if I slept much that night. I don't think so, because I spent the whole night on the sofa and woke up this morning, which is when I'm writing this. I guess putting it all down in writing makes me feel a little better. Update 1. I thank those who showed concern for me. I was in a very dark place in my mind when I wrote my initial post, but I'm not as bad as I might have led on to believe. I am sad I am affected, but I am not considering extreme decisions or anything like that. I am just a wife going through a grieving process, I guess. I stayed at home for a few days, although I have now left. During all that time my husband didn't show up, he didn't call me, he didn't reply to my last message. For several days I hardly ate or slept. My body was on autopilot as I mentally reviewed everything that had happened. I didn't just reflect on the trip, but also on our relationship before it. On the third day, the initial fog, which I think was pain, began to dissipate, replaced by intense anger. He had left me to deal with this disaster alone while he disappeared. It was as if he were the victim in this whole situation and, poor thing, trapped in a loveless marriage. I wasn't going to stay and mope around in a house full of memories that had now become painful. So I made a plan. It took me a week to organize everything. I packed my belongings, carefully separating what was really mine from what we had bought together. I didn't want to keep anything that reminded me of him. I left his things intact. Let him deal with them. I also took care of terminating the lease. The house was rented because our old apartment was too small, and we wanted to start this new phase with a larger space further away from the city center. I felt it was the right thing to do to terminate the contract because I didn't plan to stay there, and I didn't want to be responsible for paying for the place if my husband didn't come back. The contract was only in my name because he had some problems that prevented him from appearing on the contract, details that are not relevant now. I contacted the landlord, who was quite understanding, especially since we were close to the renewal date, and I scheduled the eviction notice to coincide with my departure. Then I sat down to write a letter. I needed to express my side. Although he might never read it, I at least needed to get everything I felt out. I began by telling him that I was leaving, not just the house, but also the marriage. I wrote about some personal things, sacrifices I had made for him during our time together, which are not relevant to share here. I explained how painful it was to be discarded at an airport simply for being his backup plan. I reminded him that while he was chasing an illusion, I had been building a life together, a life he didn't deserve. Finally, I told him that if he thought he was leaving on his own terms, I had already taken the first step. Along with the letter, I included official documents, one to initiate our divorce and another notifying the eviction of the house. The lease was up in a week, and he would have to find a new place and move out himself. I no longer cared where he went. It was no longer my problem. On my last day in the house, I left the letter on the kitchen counter, under his favorite mug. That way, when he came back and wanted to make himself a coffee, he would find it right away. Then I left. I have found a small apartment temporarily, which was the only option available for the moment, at least until I find something more permanent. But staying in our old house was not an option. It had become a real emotional torture. Update 2. Some have asked how I managed to find somewhere to stay so quickly. Well, it's not a long-term apartment. It's completely temporary. I knew the owner. She has a bakery and was kind enough to allow me to move into the upper part of the business, where she has a small apartment with the basics for living at such short notice. And by the way, I'm not completely alone. During all this time, I had to take a few days off work, even after returning from our vacation. Fortunately, my work was understanding of the situation. My friends have tried to support me, but I have closed myself off emotionally. I don't have much family either, so this temporary accommodation option is the best I have for now. But I have leaned on my best friend, Kelly. She showed up as soon as I told her where I had moved, and she brought enough supplies in her car to last a whole month. The amount needed if an atomic bomb were to drop, and we had to take refuge in a bunker. That's how good a friend she is. She brought bread, which I didn't really need living right above a bakery, but I forgot to mention that detail to her. She's my best friend because she knows that when I don't want to talk about something, she doesn't pressure me, and that's exactly what she did. She came over, sat with me, we ate some of the cookies she brought, and we just talked about other things. Among the provisions, there was also alcohol, which is absolutely necessary after a nuclear apocalypse or a breakup like this. So we also consoled ourselves a little with that day. The whole situation is still painful, but the biscuits and wine work wonders. Update 3. It's been exactly 2 weeks since I left the house, and I finally got the call I was expecting. I had anticipated it. It wasn't a question of if he would call me, but when. I knew he still had access to the house. The owner informed me that his belongings were still there. When I answered, he told me that he had returned, seen the letter and all the documents I had left for him. He began to apologize profusely, but he wasn't apologizing for leaving me and the terrible way he did it, that he could have handled the situation better. He was apologizing because he regretted having left me. He had spent several days reflecting and realized that it had all been a mistake. He said he missed me and that when he returned he hoped to find me there to apologize to me personally. He also asked me what had happened to his shoes. I had no answers for him. Among the things he admitted to, he said he had been selfish and that he didn't know what happened to him that day, but that he didn't really mean everything he said. He justified himself by saying that maybe he was melancholic or depressed, and that's why he made that decision. He might have been halfway believable if he hadn't clearly told me that I was his second choice. It wouldn't be forgivable, but at least believable. No matter how he felt that day, there was no reason to tell me I was his second choice unless it was true, and he couldn't erase it with apologies, or with how bad he felt now, or with anything. He said he was willing to make it up to me for all this, maybe with another trip paid for entirely out of his own pocket. He started to cry when he said my name, begging me to give him a second chance. I don't know where this man was when I found myself abandoned in an airport, but at the time I wasn't surprised. He wasn't begging me to talk things through because he didn't want anything to do with me. Why would I want to do it now? Don't get me wrong. I'm not looking for revenge, but I couldn't forgive myself if I went back to him. You don't treat your partner, whether man or woman, the way he treated me, and then just say sorry and expect everything to be magically resolved. Especially when he's no longer even an option for me. My options, even if I don't have any right now, are the ones that choose me first. That's what you do when you marry someone, and that's what I did with him. I chose him as my first and only option. I interrupted him because he was already going around in circles repeating that he forgave me and that he had made a mistake. I informed him that I had already started the divorce proceedings, and as I could see, he was taking it very seriously. He had the unfortunate idea of telling me that I should have contacted him before ending the marriage. But the one who ended it first, although not officially, was him. And I did contact him to ask him who his first choice was, and he never replied. What did he expect? That I would give him 6 months to see if he regretted it? I'm sorry to inform him that there was no free trial period for our marriage. And no, I'm not just sharing this here. I also said it to him directly. He continued to plead insistently. He promised that things would be different this time, that he would go to therapy and do whatever was necessary to make me happy. He said he hadn't realized how much I meant to him until he spent time without me, until he read the letter and the documents. I asked him if he was aware of how I felt when he abandoned me at the airport. I reproached him for not having told me everything face to face. I pointed out that the whole airport scene didn't have to happen. Among other things, I made it clear to him that we were over. I also said that although I wished him the best, in reality I didn't and I wasn't interested. He deserved better. Much better than a man who ends a marriage by text message, in an airport, and after an anniversary vacation. Listing these circumstances makes me wonder if he really expected me to give him another chance. Almost in a whisper, because he sounded completely defeated, he asked if we could meet in person to talk. He said he needed to see me, to explain himself properly, to show me how much he regretted his actions. Part of me wanted to see the pain on his face and feel the satisfaction of knowing that he finally understood what he had lost. But I knew that meeting him would only drag me back into the emotional chaos I was trying to escape. I told him I would think about it, although we both knew that my answer was already no. However, I made it clear that I would only be willing to see him for legal reasons related to the divorce. Update 4. This update comes 2 months after I left home, just to put it in context. Kelly has been my great support throughout this process, turning up unannounced with coffee or dragging me out on impromptu days out. One night, as we shared a plate of nachos at our favorite restaurant, she commented that I looked different, perhaps a little happier than before. Well, if she perceives improvement in me, maybe it's true. It's hard to notice when you're in the middle of the situation. I received a message from him. My lawyer helped me handle the communication, and there really wasn't much to divide between us. If I had known I was going to face so much drama, I would have married someone wealthy. At least then I would have got something positive out of it. Before anyone with resentment, like the person who suggested I should give him another chance, misunderstands what I'm saying, I'll make it clear that I'm joking. I'm not interested in money, but there is absolutely nothing positive I can take from this marriage. The message said that he had accepted the divorce and was signing the documents. She thanked me for the years we shared before and during our marriage, and admitted that she had made a mistake in taking me for granted. She hoped that I would find the happiness that I truly deserved. I replied with a short message, thanking her for her sincerity and wishing her the best too. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was my way of starting to let go of the whole thing. However, one day, while checking my social networks, I came across a post that explained a lot. It appeared on her profile with the woman who was supposedly his first choice. He had tagged her in a photograph, a picture of them in a bar with a comment below. I haven't added my ex to my contacts, but we share mutual friends, so some of her posts still appear on my feed. I couldn't help but laugh when I saw it. It wasn't a bitter laugh, but one of genuine ironic amusement. After all his tears and desperate apologies, he had gotten back together with her. The irony was almost poetic. This was his pattern, his way of filling the gaps in his life with people he didn't know how to value properly. I even feel a certain amount of compassion for his first choice. Even so, I didn't spend 5 minutes analyzing that photograph, and I got on with my life. It's just comforting to have some final answers. Update 5. It hadn't been 2 days since I saw that photograph when my phone rang again with his call. What else could he have to say to me? I thought, let's get this over with. He said he wanted to talk about the divorce and that he wasn't ready to give up on our relationship. I asked him what had changed since his last message, the one in which he so kindly agreed to the divorce. He replied that he had made a mistake in letting me go. I interrupted him, telling him that he didn't seem to be being sincere. I explained that I had already seen the photograph with his ex. He said that the photo with his ex meant absolutely nothing, that it had just been a casual outing with an old friend, and that people were drawing the wrong conclusions. He assured me that he still loved me, that he couldn't imagine his future without me. I let him continue with his speech, because it was almost comical to see how much he was lying. My response was that people could have misinterpreted. I really don't know what the rest think, but my personal conclusion is that his ex was toying with him regarding a possible reconciliation, and when that became evident, he didn't want to be left alone. He insisted that the photograph was completely out of context, and that I, like other people, was drawing the same mistaken conclusions. Well, in that case, I don't think all those people are wrong if they think the same as me. He claimed that he didn't love her, that he had only contacted her because he was lonely. So I asked him directly, "Isn't that the woman you said was your first choice?" At that moment, he started to cry. I know, he cries too much. He wasn't like that at all before. He stammered something like I was always the first, that he just had a moment of confusion, but that during this time he had realized that I was really his first choice. I asked him ironically, "Did you realize it by yourself, or did someone make you realize it?" He replied offended, "Do you think I can't think for myself? I don't need anyone to make me see anything. Are you completely sure that your ex didn't reject you, and now I'm your first choice simply because your real first choice has disappeared from the list?" No, that's not what happened at all. If I say you're my first choice, it's because I sincerely think so. Because that's exactly what it sounds like. And if I had the chance, I'd bet on that theory. I think I'd be willing to risk all my savings on this bet. My ex-husband then flew into a rage. "I think the one with a hidden first option is you, and you're just looking for an excuse not to tell me. If you were my second option, I would have invited you to an airport to tell you. By text message, of course. It's not funny, my name, because I'm opening my heart and choosing you sincerely, and you're not making any effort to rebuild our relationship. Wow. I'm flattered that you chose me as your second choice because you didn't get the first one, but I'm going to decline the offer. I would recommend that you look for your third choice, Maybe he has low enough self-esteem to stay with you. After that, he ended the call. It took away the satisfaction of doing it myself, but I think being able to give him those answers more than made up for it. I should clarify that I have slightly paraphrased the conversation because they were not his exact words. But it faithfully reflects the meaning of what he said, since between his crying and his anger, some words were difficult to understand. The only thing that remained perfectly clear was the truth of the situation, even if my future ex didn't want to admit it. Update 6. I haven't received any more melodramatic calls from my almost ex-husband. The divorce is about to be official. But I did receive a private message from the person who appeared with my husband in that photograph. I didn't open the message immediately. I didn't know what to expect from that communication, and I didn't feel emotionally prepared. But I should have done so earlier because it turned out not to be as negative a message as I feared. Later that night, after debating with myself internally, I finally opened the message and read it quickly. She began by introducing herself formally, as if I didn't know who she was. Then she continued in a surprisingly familiar tone, saying that she hoped I didn't consider her message inappropriate, but that she thought it was time to clarify the situation. She mentioned that she knew about the divorce and wanted to make sure that I didn't think she had anything to do with our separation. She stated that she and my ex had only resumed contact after he had told her that we were separating. She emphasized that they were currently simply friends, and that she had no responsibility for my husband's feelings. She assured me that she had no bad intentions. She even had the audacity to suggest that if I ever wanted to talk, she would be happy to clear up any misunderstandings. At this point, there is not much that needs clarification. Her message and my ex's attitude have made things quite clear. Even without her message, they already were. I don't believe she was the direct cause of my marriage disintegrating. He was. I replied politely that it was fine, that I didn't need any further explanation. I don't know exactly why, but I have a feeling that she has not been the villain in the story. I see no reason why she would write to me at this point, unless she felt guilty for having indirectly contributed to the destruction of a marriage. That is, if she really had something going on with my husband, she wouldn't be writing to me now, and my husband would be with her instead of calling me in tears to give her another chance. If I were involved in a similar situation, I would probably also try to clear my name. But even if I am wrong in my interpretation, which is possible, it really doesn't matter. I am in the process of getting a divorce. She is completely free to be with my ex if she so wishes, especially if she has already been with him during my marriage. The next day, I casually mentioned this message to Kelly, who insisted on seeing it. She shares my opinion on the matter. She is now helping me move to a more permanent place, one that doesn't constantly smell like a bakery. It's not because I dislike that aroma, it's because it doesn't help me keep my figure if all I can think about is eating those delicious freshly baked goods. I have suggested to the owner that she should decorate the apartment and advertise it on Airbnb as a unique gastronomic experience. She would surely earn a lot of money with that idea. I think that next week, or the week after the divorce, will be completely finalized. Maybe it's time to start looking for my real first choice, a relationship where I am also the other person's first choice. But there's no rush, because being alone isn't as bad as it seems either. Update 7. The divorce was finalized a few months ago, but that's not what's relevant now. Nor is the fact that my ex insisted several times that we get back together. But as nothing significant happened that's worth mentioning and I've finally blocked him, it's not even worth summarizing. The really interesting thing is that Kelly, my friend, remember her? Found out something about my ex-husband's ex. She's got married. Kelly and I have developed a theory about it, and I'd like to know your opinions so I can compare them with ours. We think that my ex found out that she had gotten engaged and it deeply depressed him. Then he broke up with me to try to win her back one last time. Maybe he organized a get-together with mutual friends, just so he could be around her. But she made it clear to him that she had a first choice in her life, and he, desperate, tried to get back together with me. This theory makes sense especially because my ex has been posting rather depressing content on his social networks, coinciding precisely with the date of his ex's wedding. Regardless of whether our theory is correct or not, the lesson here is that it is preferable to have a single genuine option and dedicate yourself completely to it, because otherwise you can end up with no options and completely alone.